1999 was a major marker in music history. Huge albums such as Eminem's Slim Shady LP, Dr. Dre's 2001, and Mos Def's Black on Both Sides were all released that year. But overshadowing any music that came out was a brand new piece of software. And this software was used on a new file sharing platform called Napster that was set to potentially destroy the music industry entirely. In the 1990s, the FBI was trying to locate a hacker who had broken into the website of a Fortune 500 company. When they traced the IP address, they realized that the person responsible was a teenage boy named Sean Parker. Because he was still a minor, Parker was punished with community service, and it was around this time that Sean Parker met Sean Fanning. Both of them shared a passion for technology, particularly hacking and internet security. They met on a chat room called W00W00 alongside other hackers. Instead of hacking and getting into trouble, the two Seans, alongside some other friends, decided to set up an internet security company called Crosswalk. The company was unsuccessful, but they were still teenagers. And against his father's wishes, Parker decided not to enroll in college, and when Fanning shared with him an idea of his, the two started working on a brand new company. One of Fanning's friends was struggling to find digital music on the internet. An article in Time magazine described this period and states, "Downloading music was so cumbersome it was mostly relegated to college students with access to fast pipes and techno geeks sufficiently driven to search the net for the latest Fish bootlegs." Fanning came up with the idea of a file sharing program. If someone wanted to listen to the Slim Shady LP, they could search for it on Napster, and another user may have it on their computer. Through this platform, computers would share hard drives with each other. Before Spotify, a lot of people downloaded music from their CDs onto their hard drives and had a music library. And with Napster, people all over the world could share their music collections with each other. Fanning would say, "I had this idea that there was a lot of material out there sitting on people's hard drives. I mean, even if you were at search engine websites like Lycos or Scar, you were still looking at people's hard drives. So that's the idea, that there's all this stuff sitting on people's PCs, and I had to figure out a way to go and get it." However, Fanning was paranoid that someone else may have come up with the same idea, so he dropped out of college and worked at an office in his uncle's house, where he aggressively developed the software. At one point, he spent 60 hours straight focusing on this project in his uncle's office. Once Fanning got the software he wanted, he tested it out with his friends. The company was called Napster, which was Fanning's username on the woo-woo forum, mainly because his hair was always in a nap. By the time Napster came around, he became known for his buzz cut. Fanning was in charge of the tech side of Napster, whereas Parker was involved with the business side. And funnily enough, their first pitch meeting to investors was the first time that Fanning and Parker had met physically in person. Fanning's uncle John provided them with startup money, but cut them a pretty raw deal. John provided them with money, but on the basis that he owned 70% of the company. The other 30% would be owned by Sean Fanning. Both of the Seans were not even 20 years old yet, so one of their investors, Eileen Richardson, took on the role as its CEO. Napster became official on June 1st, 1999, and the idea of providing people with free music on their computer was revolutionary. But there was more to it than free music. Fanning told the British Broadcasting Company, "It was something that provided a better, more reliable, and fun way for people to share music and see each other's music collection. For the first time, this full history of recorded music was available online to everyone instantly." There was also a communal aspect where you could see what like-minded music fans also listened to. In an age that predated social media, this was revolutionary. As well as this, you could access music without the CD model. Hardcore Eminem fans at that time probably listened to the Slim Shady LP from start to finish, but there were many people who may have only liked one or two Eminem songs but still had to pay $17 for a CD of 18 tracks. And even at this early stage, Napster was thinking of how they could charge for music. Eileen Richardson thought that if they could charge $1 per song, then people would gladly pay for it. She would say, "Why would you spend $17 on a Britney Spears CD and get only 2 songs that you like? Wouldn't you prefer to spend $17 and get 17 songs that you like?" While record companies might lose sales in CDs, the sale of MP3s has much less overhead as there's no manufacturing and distributing involved. But at the end of the day, all these MP3s being shared on Napster were someone else's intellectual property. And what everyone was doing on this site was illegal. So within 6 months, Napster was sued by the RIAA, or the Recording Industry Association of America, for copyright infringement. The organization, which represented most of the major record labels, claimed that the platform was enabling the theft of millions of dollars worth of recorded music. Napster, meanwhile, claimed that they were not engaged in any illegal activity and were simply a file-sharing service. While this lawsuit was taking place, Napster continued to operate as usual. In January of 2000, many American universities blocked Napster from their computers. but not for the reason that you'd think. It wasn't because it involved illegal downloading, but because it was used so often that it was overrunning their networks. 4 months later, Napster experienced another lawsuit. The band Metallica became aware of Napster when they had a song called I Disappear scheduled for the Mission Impossible 2 soundtrack. But before the soundtrack was released, they heard this song playing on the radio. Apparently, a demo had made its way from their studio to Napster and onto the radio. Metallica was infuriated by this new phenomena and took Napster to court. A press release from the band said, "It is therefore sickening to know that our art is being traded like a commodity rather than the art that it is. From a business standpoint, this is about piracy, taking something that doesn't belong to you, and that is morally and legally wrong." As well as copyright infringement, Metallica claimed that Napster violated the RICO Act, which is the very same charge that Young Thug is fighting today. Napster defended themselves against the RIAA by saying it wasn't them infringing on copyright, but its users. But with the RICO charge, you really only need to be involved in the organization itself to be prosecuted. 2 weeks later, Napster had another lawsuit on their hands, this time from none other than Dr. Dre. Interestingly, this lawsuit left room for going after the users of Napster too. Dre's attorney, Howard King, said, "If it turns out that there are people who have huge hard drives and actually are downloading copyrighted materials and transmitting them on the internet, we may very well go after them because they are engaged in theft." And even before this lawsuit, Dr. Dre's lawyers had told Napster to take their clients' music off their platform. According to King, their only response was to say that the songs aren't on their servers, and if Young will send a letter under penalty of perjury identifying specific songs and users, that they would restrict those users. That was not a satisfactory response. That was a comical response. However, amongst this wave of lawsuits, Napster found themselves an unlikely ally, Chuck D from Public Enemy. He wrote in the New York Times in full support of Napster and how it was bringing his music to more fans. He would say, "By exposing people to music, companies like Napster are creating new fan interest and establishing a new infrastructure for unknown artists to attract an audience, a new radio for the new millennium." But whatever support they had coming their way, they had 3 lawsuits on their hands. In May of 2000, 13 boxes of documents were sent to their office in San Francisco. These documents were sent by the band Metallica and its legal team and showed the hundreds of thousands of users who were illegally downloading their music. And in response, Napster blocked 300,000 users from the site. Eileen Richardson stood down as CEO and was replaced by Hank Berry, an investor and copyright lawyer, whose expertise would hopefully help steady the ship. In that same month, Napster received $15 million worth of investment from a venture capital firm. However, a lot of this money wasn't spent on product development, but on fighting their legal battles. By the summer of 2000, 14,000 songs were being downloaded every minute on this site, and there was evidence to suggest that people would be willing to pay for Napster. A Massachusetts research firm found that more than half of Napster using college students would be willing to pay $15 a month for the service, which is, interestingly enough, more than what Spotify Premium charges today. And keep in mind, this is in 2000, so 15 then is not 15 today. It's worth about $27 today. So Napster was desperate to strike deals with the labels and move to a $1 per song model, but this was easier said than done. Barry doesn't know why they wouldn't strike deals, but there's been suspicion that the labels were hiding something. He said, "Suddenly, the data associated with digital transactions was unambiguous and very powerful. For years, record companies had traded on dodgy numbers. What the lawyers were afraid of was wholesale renegotiation of artist contracts triggered by data transparency. And board members at record labels were also completely out of touch. Alison Wenham, a co-founder of the Association of Independent Music, recalls an industry exec who said that they could solve the Napster issue by banning the internet. Fewer and fewer people were buying records, and the music industry was potentially at the cliff's edge." As well as Chuck D, Napster found themselves with a much more likely ally than Chuck D. As part of a Save Napster campaign, a hacker named Pimp Shiz managed to take over more than 50 websites and called this the Save Napster hack attack. Verizon Wireless Messaging Services, the Digital Printing and Imaging Association, and the Center for Defense Information had all been defaced by this single user. The backlash turned Napster and its founders into celebrities. In September, Sean Fanning was invited to the MTV VMAs and showed up wearing a Metallica shirt. And in October, Fanning was on the cover of Time magazine. However, in November, a memo from Sean Parker was leaked and showed that he was aware that people were sharing pirated music. So, Parker decided to step down and leave the company. Ultimately, Napster was clearly a popular platform. It just needed to be legal. The German media company Bertelsmann had their eye on Napster and decided to invest in it on the basis that it became a paid service and artists were reimbursed for every time their MP3 was shared. Bertelsmann already owned the copyright for artists like Carlos Santana, Shania Twain, Elvis Presley, and Whitney Houston, so they had a catalog to work with off the bat. They also hired Conrad Hilber's one of their top executives as Napster's new CEO. Hilber's objective was to turn Napster into a fully legit business, one which would not attract so many lawsuits. In July of 2001, Napster reached a settlement with Metallica and Dr. Dre, where it was agreed that Napster needed an artist's permission if they wanted their music on its platform. That same month, Napster shut down its service, with the intention of coming back with a paid service. In September of 2001, the company reached an agreement with the RIAA, where they agreed to pay $26 million to copyright owners and an advance of $10 million. This was a crippling amount of money for them to pay off. Having lost 3 lawsuits, Napster had other issues on their plate. They were victim to copycat sites like Kazaa, Gnutella, and LimeWire, and as a paid-for service, they were now competing with programs that were free. Napster also struggled with licensing deals and a lifeline deal where Bertelsmann would fully take over the company. That ended up falling through. In May of 2002, Napster laid off a ton of its employees, and suddenly Conrad Hilbers and Sean Fanning resigned, as did several other senior executives. From the outside, it looked like rats fleeing a sinking ship, and this was confirmed when the company soon filed for bankruptcy. Ultimately, it was the record labels who would suffer in the long run. Instead of providing an alternative, they did everything they could to shut Napster down and keep the inevitable move towards digital music at bay. The introduction of iTunes provided the dollar per song model that Napster initially tried to propose, but over time the music industry continued to shrink. YouTube, Pandora, Spotify, and others all provided platforms where you didn't have to pay for music, and this became the norm. Sean Parker, who became an early investor in Facebook, was also an early investor in Spotify. If you've seen the movie The Social Network, he's Justin Timberlake's character. In 1999, the music industry was valued at $25.2 billion worldwide, but by 2014, this figure had shrunk to $14.2 billion. It wasn't until 2015 that the music industry recovered from this fall and began to grow again, largely because of streaming platforms. Steve Knopper, who's the editor of Billboard, written a book about Napster, said, "It's my contention that record companies could have avoided much of this had they been smarter about dealing with Napster. If not licensing content to it directly, then doing a better job of creating a competing, cost-effective service rather than just stonewalling and treating the internet as a threat. Maybe the lesson here is the record business always wins in the end, but they sure made it unnecessarily hard for themselves for a long time." Make sure to subscribe for more.